We are celebrating today 125 years in historical conference of Leopold Kohn. But let me start provocatively, and part of that is to offer a background. And that is that I don't think we would have been celebrating this day, and I don't think we would have taken so much interest in Leopold Kohn if it wasn't for his son, Joseph Kohn, who turned the successful mission of his father into a national and then international enterprise. Hope you're hearing me. Are you there?
Yes, loud and clear.
Loud and clear, because I didn't sense the Rotten Tomatoes haven't reached me yet. I'm saying that because I think that the role of Joseph is very pivotal, very central, but also because to place the early work of Leopold Kohn in a certain context. To begin with, he was one of quite a few missionaries who labored in the New York area at the turn of the 20th century. He was successful, he was intelligent. He already started establishing good relationship with benefactors in the Protestant community. And he also was very successful in relative terms in the number of converts he made, which was quite remarkable to the time and place. But I think that the person who turned the mission into an enterprise that left its mark nationally and globally was mostly his son. I am saying that provocatively, not in order to belittle Leopold Kohn. I was very impressed by what I read of him, first and foremost, but in order to place him in a certain, I would say, historical context. Let's go back and start with the missions. Missions to the Jews did not start in America. That is, Protestant missions to the Jews, motivated by a certain outlook on the Jews and their role in history, did not start in America. Although in the 20th century, America became the hub of missions in general, and missions to the Jews included. It started quite amazingly, perhaps a little bit overlooked, actually in Central Europe, in Germany of the early 18th century. Technically, the first mission or house for converts, Protestant house for converts, was in Hamburg, but the first systematic mission to the Jews that people who studied Jewish texts, who wrote for Jews, who visited Jews, who argued with Jews, who were recruiting missionaries, training them, sending them, knowing the real Jews or studying the real Jews, who they were the Pietists of Halle at the turn of the 18th century. I think it's important to remember that Protestants from the very beginning wanted to approach the Jews. This goes all the way back to Martin Luther. This was part of Puritan agenda already in New England of the 17th century. But missions, in the sense that we know them, that Leopold Kohn represented in a small way, because the Halle mission was global in the as far as the times were concerned. This started in Germany of the early 18th century and left its mark for hundreds of years. Further Pietist-oriented missions came about in Germany, in Scandinavia, in Switzerland, in Holland. The British took over in the early 19th century, very famously, the London Society for Promoting Christianity among the Jews. Dozens of British missionaries throughout the 19th century, English, Scottish, Welsh, Irish Protestants play a huge role. Attempts at creating missions in America did not work well. There were quite a few attempts, but they did not work well until the 1880s. The the paradigm were the British missions, and I think it's not a coincidence that Leopold Kohn was educated in Britain. He, in his tracts written for Jews, in his essays, he proves very good theological knowledge and very good ability to articulate his messages. I believe that his education in Scotland was extremely important for that purpose. Not only because he came from an Hungarian part of Europe, but because in some ways he was trained by, by the British within what became already a British tradition, if you will, of evangelizing the Jews. At the time that Leopold Kohn established his missions in Brownsville, there were hundreds of missionaries, Protestant-backed, Jewish-born and raised, or non-Jewish born and raised missionaries aiming at the Jews around the globe. We have a wonderful book that was written in the early 20th century by A.E. Thompson, Century of Missions, in which he records dozens and dozens of missions, British, European, continental, British, American, showing that this is not just an American endeavor, but actually America joins, if you will, the wagon towards the end of the 19th century as a vital, dynamic, successful force within the field. My claim would be that at the very beginning of Leopold Kohl's work, said he was successful, he was lucky, he was successful, he was intelligent, he established connection with the Protestant community, he raised funds, he approached successfully Jews, he was known, he made a remarkable number of converts, but the Brownsville mission was for quite a, and later on, the missions he established while they were growing, while there were, even during his lifetime, branches established, like in Philadelphia, they were still what I would call local missions. They were still one successful missionary among the many. Others were less lucky, less systematic, understood less the need to be in contact, in successful contact, both with the Protestant sponsoring community and with the Jewish immigrant community. Now, what happened in America at the turn of the 20th century that made Leopold Kohn's work so successful in relative terms, and then enabled his son, who was trained at the Moody Bible Institute, to, and had even better connections with the larger Protestant community, understood it well, spoke its language, struggled for the cause of missions to the Jews, to turn it into a national and international group, one of the largest, most successful, most impressive, most systematic groups in the field of missions. I would say that we have to look at the realities of America, American Protestantism, and American Jewry. I hope that everybody is with me so far. Hello?
Yes, we're getting a big yes. Loud and clear. Thank you. We're with you.
Nobody's falling asleep. I cannot see.
You'll hear the snoring if they do, but I doubt you will.
Okay. Nobody is preparing rotten tomatoes, I hope, yet. I apologize. I needed a short break.
Said they'd send the rotten tomatoes by attachment, so don't worry about it.
Okay. A few things are happening. One thing is that America, there was an immigration to America. The Jewish community in the 1820s, until the 1820s, this is already a generation after after independence, there were just few thousand Jews in America. Missionaries attempt going on. Between the 1840s and the 1870s, 250,000 Jews come to America, mostly from Central Europe, mostly German-speaking Jews. 1880s, we get mass immigration between the 1880 and 1923, when the laws block Jewish immigration to America. About 3 million Jews reach America, mostly from Eastern Europe. Most of them Yiddish speakers, people who come, if not penniless, then with very meager means. Jews who work in the New York area in the sweatshops, push carts. This is working class Jewish society. At the same time, most immigrants throughout the 19th century are young, hopeful. They need to adjust to a new surrounding, a new social, economic, political, cultural surrounding. They want to integrate. They want to become part of America. They are Jewish. I won't go into the whole spiel of the fact that the cons were proud Jews and were struggling within the Protestant community that sponsored them, within the milieu they worked in, for the role and place of Jews, including Jews who accepted Christianity, in the American surrounding. This is a theme all of its own. You can read what they wrote, which was very daring in many ways. But I'm looking at the situation. The people approach the missions. Not all of them convert, not all of them accept Jesus, not all of them become Christian, but the people who approach the missions are mostly young, migrants, immigrants. They are, again, contrary to, again, many stereotypes, they are eager, hardworking, ambitious young people who want to adjust, who need to find a new framework, social, communal, mental, spiritual, intellectual. Things have changed since leaving their small towns until they reach the big city. They need something new. Most find there's something new within the Jewish frameworks. Most either secularized or liberalized, but some need to adjust, if you will, their spiritual beings. And Christianity, in the form that is presented by Leopold Kohn and others, is certainly an option that many consider. I don't think that the mission would have been there, alongside dozens of other missions, if it wasn't for this huge migration, huge immigration, but also migration to a small extent, that took place during those years. This provided a lot of impetus, a lot of ground impetus, and, if you will, need from the point of view of Protestants relating to Jews, of missionary zeal to work in. This called for such an effort. Incidentally, in Europe too, if you look at Britain, if you look even in Eastern Europe, missions are sending members to Eastern Europe's Western missions, Central European missions, American missions, including very soon the American Board of Missions to the Jews. They also dealing there with immigrants and migrants in the cities. If you look even at Palestine, missions are sending, in relative terms, very large number of missionaries to Palestine. They're working there among immigrants, among the people who want change, who want a new revelation, who want to readjust, who are not contented within the old world from which they come and in which they grew up. So this is one look at the situation. But another look is what motivates the missions? Why the Jews? Why so much effort, energy, hope, resources, manpower directed at the Jews? Why are Protestants considering the Jews with so much eagerness and hope, so much resourcefulness, so much variety? I would claim that you need to look at the theology, ideology, motivation that is beyond the missions. Contrary to very Jewish perception, it's not about those bad goyim trying to annihilate us through the cross or through the Bible, their Bible. Those are people who are interested in the Jews. They might be ambivalent culturally towards Jews on some levels, but they consider the Jews to be a special people. They consider the Jews to be Jesus' brothers and sisters. They consider the Jews to be a people that are still destined for a glorious future in a restored Davidic kingdom in the land of Israel, in the Holy Land. Leopold, his mission, and almost all other missions that we examined during the period hold to that hope. They don't see the Jews as just ordinary people who need to be embraced by Christianity and swallowed there and disappeared there. They see that as a people with a special mission in history. It's not just they, it's their sponsors. It's the groups that help finance them. It's the individuals that support them. It's the community that is willing, sometime I would say with still reservations, still some residues of both theological and cultural reservations about the Jews, but at the same time is changing its opinion or adjusting its opinion of Jews based on a new Messianic biblical outlook or hope. This was true big time about the Pietists, students of Spener, the great theologian of the Pietists in Germany in the late 17th century, early 18th century. This was true about the Institutum Judaicum, which the Pietists established in Halle. This was true about a series of Pietist missions, such as the Prussian mission that acted in Berlin well into World War II and against Nazi wishes. This was true big time about the British missions, the London Society. There is, I would say, a theological change, a theological reassessment of who the Jews are or were. Those Protestants that are not interested in the Jews, that don't like Jews, don't consider them anything special, or that supposedly take a neutral outlook, they don't invest in missions. They don't dedicate their lives, time, resources to bring Jews to accept Christ. They're not the ones invested in writing, translating, disseminating printed work. It used to be that the work was printed. Nowadays, it's all electronic, or mostly electronic. We're talking here about a new commitment, a new attitude. I spoke for only, I think, 20 or so minutes, but because I have issues, medical issues, I think that I will stop, take a break, listen to your questions, and then come back to one more thing that I promised, although I related to it somewhat, and this is the Jewish reaction.
All right, Yaakov, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Can you hear me? I mean, did you hear me?
This has just been perfect. So I'm going to be the MC for the question and answer period. So we're going to take some questions, and then when you're ready to return to your discourse, let me know, and we'll wrap up this this end of the questioning.
No, but you can absolutely ask me question. I can answer questions. That would be easier for me right now, I think. And
Okay.
I apologize. I apologize for being this old injured man.
Please, no apology necessary. We're just grateful that you're with us, even on television. Questions? Anything so far? Okay, we have one.
We're grateful for your enlightened, um, positive, respectful dealing with matters of missionary behaviors and things of that sort, which are so gravely stigmatized in the Jewish world. Have you encountered punitive kickback from the Jewish world because you have the chutzpah to
I did.
speak
I
fairly
did.
about Jews who believe in
I did.
Jesus?
I did. You know, I wrote a number of books. I wrote dozens of articles. The one prize I received was from the Society of Church History. It wasn't from the Society of Jewish History. I mean, there are a number of such societies. But that's not a punitive measure. There was a very, very nasty article by a Reform rabbi who dedicated his life to combating missions. And he wrote about me that I'm obviously a missionary in disguise and that I'm an enemy of the Jewish people. It hurt terribly when I read that, because it so happens that I am totally Jewish. That by totally Jewish, I don't mean that I'm the right kind of Jew. There are 100 different right kind of Jews. I consider Jews that accept Jesus and consider themselves Jewish and are connected and interested to be fully Jewish. And I don't discriminate between one Jew and another based on ideology, theology, or political affiliation, to give another example. Some people do, many people do. And nothing I think in my life is more important to me, except my family, than the well-being of Jews and of the Jewish people as a culture or cultures, as communities. And to read that I'm an enemy is not exactly something that I enjoyed. So I almost forgot about that, but you reminded me. I think that I have sensed a change throughout the years. And if we're talking 40 years ago, people could have reacted, people still can react with hostility, but I think that there's a much growing tolerance, acceptance of Jewish believers in Jesus. You see that in articles in Jewish journals and Jewish newspapers. You see that in the attitude of individuals. It depends, of course, where you're located in the Jewish community and where you're located as a human being. But I think it also matter. You know, it's a matter that has to do, like everything else, with do you meet those people? Do you see them? Do you understand them? In Israel, for example, there's a growing community of Messianic Jews, quote unquote. There are many types and colors and versions. So is the situation in America. And those are good citizens. People notice that. People have to notice that and respect it. And there's, I think, a growing awareness, at least in some Jewish circles, that there's no one definition of a Jew. And that people are Jewish in many ways. And the more ways there are, the better, because otherwise you exclude people and you turn the Jewish community even into an even smaller than it already is. So while I encountered, I think, more skepticism or not just hostility, but skepticism, even among quote unquote progressive Jews or observant Jews. I think that this has changed somewhat throughout the years. That's what I would like to think is the case. But I think it's true.
All right, thank you. Do you want to take another question at this point, or go on?
I'm willing to take another question, absolutely,
All right.
because I think those questions are connecting me to the audience and to the participants, and also allow me to breathe better.
Good. Okay, you will be guided by what your needs are. Here's another question coming at you.
Dr. Ariel, we're very grateful for your the depth of scholarship that you bring to our conference. Perhaps you can give us some insight into Leopold Kohn's standing in his own milieu, that is among his peers at his time. The truth is that many of us would actually not disagree with you concerning the significance of his son's impact on the ministry, but give us some view of Cohen's presence among his milieu.
Okay, so I mean, this question can go in very different directions. Let me tell you that my reading when I was researching missions to the Jews in the New York area, also outside the New York area, at the turn of the 20th century, late 19th century, early 20th century, I was amazed at how those missionaries were very often very competitive with each other. They competed on resources, on the approval of the Protestant community. They competed on Jewish immigrants and young people, children of immigrants, to approach them. They competed the way that, on some levels, they competed the way that people compete over turfs. On some levels, they competed the way that academicians compete, who is more successful in his publications, in his aura, in his standing. And Leopold Kohn, and the Kohns in general, because they were so successful, stirred a lot of envy, a lot of resentment. Joseph Kohn was not a popular person. And I think that's, and people in the community of missionaries sometimes overlooked his enormous achievements on many levels. And what he accomplished, a systematic, well-organized, well-functioning, growing missionary endeavor that's very good in approaching the Protestant community, that is very good in approaching different communities of Jews around the globe. I mean, I can go on and on. Success is a tricky reality. I still recommend it. That is, they were successful. Joseph Kohn himself wrote, incidentally, about various friends and acquaintances in the mission world, and bringing the famous case of Arshaviak, another missionary who was their friend, that it was very easy to downfall. You had enemies. You had enemies in the Jewish community who were searching for you, Jewish journalists, Jewish community leaders. You had enemies within the missionary community. It was it was not just the mistakes that you could make, but the way that they would have been perceived, rumors that were directed against you. The defamations against Leopold Kohn are incredible. But then you open his writing, this man was theologically educated and sophisticated. This person managed to convert hundreds of young people. That person, I mean, and then you hear all kinds of rumors. Anytime he was a widow and searching, I mean, you know the story. It sounds like petty gossip in a Jewish small town. He was a widow searching for another woman in his life, and the entire New York community more or less started claiming that he's going around abusing the female sex or something to that extent. I'm a little bit exaggerating, but not very much. Those people were under watch. This was in some ways a risque business, particularly when the missions were still mom and pop and mom, whatever you want to call it, endeavors. when it was really one missionary enterprise with some assistance, this was very dangerous. You were associated, you were with the mission, it was not just a big organization, you were not one among the many. You were the founder, you were the beginner, you were a suspect. Where did you come from? Why are you engaged in that endeavor? If you want to listen to some of the defamation, Leopold was a runaway criminal who ran away from Sing Sing. I'm making that up, the last part of the sentence. It was, and Joseph Kohn writes about it and laments, it was a dangerous, on some levels, it was a very exciting, pioneering from his perspective, engaging enterprise, and they were good at it ultimately, but they were very, very much aware of the risks. And they were under watch, and they were defamed from within and without. If you analyze very carefully some of the defamations, I'm not talking about the defamations in the realm of fantasy, meaning, he's now courting, whatever. Those informations came from the inside of the milieu, and then were used in the outside in even more, how should I put it, defamatory manner. When Joseph Kohn wrote his book, he called it "I Fought a Good Fight," and it's a fight within the Protestant community, and it's a fight within the missionary community. They struggled, they were careful, they were successful, they succeeded, and they steered envy, which at the same time that they should have steered actually a lot of respect, because they managed to accomplish things that other people did not manage to accomplish within the missionary, I would call it network. I hope I answered your question. I'm not sure.
We have another questioner out here. If you're willing to take another one.
Of course.
Good.
Dr. Ariel, my name's Jim Melnick. I want to thank you so much. This has been wonderful, and really appreciate your time with us today. You made a comment that really got my interest at the end as well on the pietists and what you meant, your comment on Nazi Germany. So recently I started reading this book by Alfred Rosenberg called The Track of the Jew Through the Ages. And I was actually astonished by some of the material that was in it, because he goes back and, besides all the other junk that's in there and anti-Semitism and everything else, he actually refers back to works related to German missions to the Jews and Philo-Semites in Germany. Right. It's just amazing. I'd never seen this before. I wondered if you'd done any work on that, or if anybody else has.
Yes. There is. It's now, let me put it even in that way, it's now growing. It's now, there's some, if you're interested in the story of the Prussian mission, there's Christopher Clark, professor at Cambridge University, one of the most respected today historians of Germany and Prussia. He started with work on the Jewish mission in Berlin, but since then he became really perhaps the number one, or one of the major historians of Germany. You can read his book. I recommend it. There are a number of works that started, I would say, hesitantly in the 1960s, 1970s. People at that time were very wary of the idea that there were Germans that were Philo-Semite, a term that we need to define and is not simple. It's a complicated term, but so I'd like to define it, if you allow me. It's Christians interested in Jews, support often Jewish causes, defend Jews against defamations and harassment on behalf of Christian faith. So there is work, Baruch Mevorach from the Hebrew University in the 1960s and 70s wrote such work, good work. The pietists were, of course, pro-Jewish emancipation, and whatever reservations they had about Jews sometimes. They met Jews, they knew Jews, but they were interested in the Jews. They defended Jews against legal and physical harassment all over the globe. They wrote tracts against the blood libel. This includes people like Franz Delitzsch, the great scholar of the New Testament, also of the Old Testament. To give you more examples. So now there's a renewed interest in German, not just philo-Semitism, but German positive, if you will, involvement in the Jews. And a number of works have been written in the last decade. Aya Eliada from the Hebrew University, she's a professor at the Hebrew University, wrote about Christians who studied Yiddish and collected libraries in Yiddish and wrote in Yiddish. The Institutum Judaicum, the Halle Pietists in the early 18th century, late 17th century, they're establishing a university, a superb university in Halle as far as Semitic languages are concerned, as far as the study of the ancient Near East, because it's a pietist group. They're very much interested, of course, in the Hebrew Bible, and not just the New Testament. And it would become such a university for generations. And they are the first university on earth to establish academic teaching of Yiddish. Just as in the United States, just for the record, Yiddish was first taught on post-secondary level at the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago in the 1920s. Not at Columbia University. This would come only half a century later. I'm saying that not as attacking anyone or criticizing anyone, but again, those are chapters of history that are not always fully known to people in the field. There were philo-Semitic trends in Germany, absolutely, in the 18th century, in the 19th century, early 20th century. Unfortunately, they were not strong enough to counterbalance, to serve as checks and balances to very different kind of attitudes.
Dr. Ariel, would you prefer to continue to field questions? All of us are finding this an extremely good format. Or would
absolutely,
okay,
absolutely.
then let's just keep on going, and then here's another one coming at you.
Thank you, Dr. Yaakov Ariel. I had yesterday, Dr. Karen mentioned that Leopold Kohn was successful because he really knew to connect with the background of the Jewish people coming to America in the way he communicated the Christian message to them. Is that something you could comment on, so that he presented in a way that made it easier for them to swallow, apparently, than the other missionaries did? Is that something you could comment on more?
I would agree with that, although I would say that there were two schools of missionaries at the time. I don't have to call it schools, two outlooks, two understandings of how to approach the Jews. Some people claim that it's better if the missionary was not Jewish, because then the Jews were not as resentful or suspicious. Arno Gebelein, who established a mission to the Jews in exactly the same time in New York, in the Lower East Side, and spoke Yiddish, although he was a German, educated German, who his claim is just make as many mistakes as you can in your German, which is not very respectful of Yiddish, many grammatical mistakes as you can. But he claimed that very often Jews suspected that he was Jewish, and that would make him lose credibility. The Jews were more respectful, actually, towards a non-Jewish missionary They didn't see him as a traitor. They didn't see him as someone who defected to the other camp. They didn't question his sincerity, his honesty, his motivation. And he recommended that non-Jews approach Jews. Another person who worked with him who was even more into what you could call the Messianic Jewish attitude, that Jews can convert to Christianity, stay Jewish, and maintain their culture, language, symbols, etc., was a gentleman by the name of Streuter, also German, who incidentally represented the mission and its publications in the first two Zionist conferences. It was not the only missionary or Christian Zionist to do so. So this was once, if you will, school. Another school was that of the Cohns, very much advocated also in the writings of Joseph Cohn. You need to be Jewish to understand those people, to relate to them, to speak their own language, to understand what they're going through. It's a fact that Leopold Cohn as a missionary was very, very successful on many levels. And one of them is, it's a fact, he approached young Jews, or young Jews approached him, and it was a very successful endeavor. Taking me to say yes right now, yes, well, you see, he was so much more successful, would be to take sides in this historical, to go back 120 years and say, hey, Gebeline, you were mistaken. Cohn does a better job. Since I appreciate both, and I have particular admiration to Gebeline, who was a first-rate intellectual who wrote about many, many themes, I find it very hard to say so, but I think that the presentation was a very insightful one.
Thank you. We have another question coming at you.
Dr. Ariel, thank you for being with us. I just have a question.
I should have asked people to introduce themselves, and I'm sorry I didn't do that because my sense is I missed on many good minds whose names I should remember.
I'm Zahava Glazer. I'm Mitch Glazer's caretaker.
Ah, you sound like my wife. That's how my wife would have introduced herself. Yes.
I was just wondering what sparked your interest in studying Messianic Jewish movements?
Okay, so I have a standard answer to that, which goes back to my early years in Jerusalem. Post-1967, even Jerusalem, divided Jerusalem, where I lived on the border between what was then Israel and Jordan. And Jerusalem at that time had on every corner, missionary houses, missionaries, Messianic Jewish groups of sorts. And I was always very curious to make sense of who those people were, what brought them over, what motivated them, who sent them, who sponsored them, why are they so interested, and so on and so forth. They were both representative of an outside world, and at the same time, they were part of our world. So that's my standard answer, but I think, again, I'll have to go back to that war in 1973 to give you the full answer. I'm not sure you want to hear it. Yeah.
We want to hear it, if you're willing to tell it.
Well, I wrote about it, so you need to translate my work into English. I have a book about that period in my life called The Road to Damascus. And not necessarily following St. Paul. So I wrote about it a little bit. But I think it's fascinating, and I think that many Jewish historians have made a mistake to overlook that aspect in Jewish life. For the past 200 years for sure, but it goes back actually more than 300 years, that missionaries were part of the Jewish scene. By saying that, I'm not talking just about the people or the organizations, the literatures, their ideas, and what I would call the borderline cultures that they created. Because this doesn't go beyond Leopold Kohn and Joseph Kohn, but the truth is that we have different kind of borderline cultures that are created by this fascinating, rather intensive interest of some Protestants in Jews that have created borderline cultures of Jews and of non-Jews who not just interacted with each other, but also created something that is in between. And to overlook that, I think, is a terrible mistake. I hope I made sense in my last few sentences, because if you're not aware of those borderline cultures, literatures, organizations, personalities, you might not realize what I'm talking about. But I think it's all over the place.
Thank you. Yes. We don't want to overtax your energy. Maybe we have time for maybe just one or two more. Let's see if. No, I think I've given. I'm getting a rebellion out. Cora's rebellion. Yeah. Okay, we're going to give you the time to bring up the last point that you want to bring up now.
No, actually, throughout my answers, I brought it up. So if there's one more person who wants to ask the question, that's okay. And
all right, let's continue then. Are there anything else that we have in terms of questions for Dr. Ariel? You have one more? Okay, well, we have to give pride of place to the queen of the mission here.
Hi, I'm back.
Hi, nice to talk to you.
Yeah.
I don't know if we never, I think, met, although we should have met, because I was told, and I don't know if that's the case, and that's an opportunity to check, that your son, I think it was your son or daughter, graduated from Harvard Law School.
Yes, she did. I was about to say that to everybody. But
And that this was, yeah, and this happened just when my son was graduating from Harvard Law School.
Oh, I wonder if they knew each other.
I'm sure I think they, but we didn't meet, although we were both all
there.
of us came to the graduation, but there were a few thousand people there. And so
we were the Jewish family.
Yeah, you were the only Jewish family from New York, yeah. And we were the only ones okay, I won't go into that, but there were so many just Israelis, Israeli names at on the list, that I wasn't sure that this was really Harvard.
My question might be outside of your field specifically, but it's about pre-Reformation Jewish outreach. Do you know of any that didn't involve forced sermons, forced baptisms, Jewish Christian converts turning against their people and against the Talmud? Do you know of others?
There were both during the late Middle Ages and during the early modern era, what we could call Catholic, although before the Reformation, that's a meaningless, perhaps, category. There were such outreach agencies. I know I was approached I never did any work on Catholic missions. I have to be very outright about that. There have been Catholic missions all the way to the 1960s. Some very, very interesting stuff, like the Brothers and Sisters of Zion. I never really studied the Catholic missions. I have to be very, very open about it. I know that some people have, but not enough. So what you're suggesting is actually topics for PhD dissertations for a new generation of scholars. I don't know of too many works on missions, on Catholic missions to the Jews.
I'm remembering a testimony by somebody named Herman. Does that ring a bell? And it was quite a few hundred years ago, and it was a Jewish account of a Jewish man named Herman who came to faith through the
There've been
priest or something.
There have been hundreds of thousands of Jews who converted without being forced to the Catholic faith. I don't know of, as I said, of too many books about histories of Catholic missions to the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a field of research that should be encouraged.
Well, Dr. Ariel, we want to just express our enormous appreciation. I hope you can hear this applause.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.